welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and other literary professionals about books, publishing, and their writing life. I'm Kelley Vick, the host of the program, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, debut author Daniel Turtel. Daniel Turtel grew up on the Jersey Shore. He graduated from Duke University in 2013 with a degree in mathematics and is currently pursuing an MFA at the New School. In 2020, his then unpublished novel, Greetings from Asbury Park, was awarded the Faulkner Society's Best Novel Award. The book was recently released by Blackstone Publishing. Daniel's writing has appeared in the Baltimore Review and won numerous awards. He now lives in New York City. Greetings from Asbury Park is his debut novel. Daniel Turtel, thank you for being here today and congratulations on publication of your first novel, Greetings from Asbury Park. It's getting some great buzz, and I'd like to start out by reading a few blurbs and reviews, if that's okay. Pulitzer Prize winner Junot Diaz says it's a novel to be cherished, a blazing summer for the heart and mind. New York Times bestselling author Tom Perrotta calls it a remarkable debut from a talented writer, ambitious, moving, full of complicated, thorny characters, and enough Jersey Shore ambiance that you can almost smell the boardwalk. New York Journal of Books says it's a pithy, enjoyable, modern-day story from start to finish with a cast of fully realized characters you'll champion to the end. And Booklist says Turtel captures the smells and sounds of Asbury Park vividly, relating the look and feel of mundane, oft overlooked details with language that renders them anew. Everyone struggles here, but the depiction is sublime. So with that, let's dive in. What can you tell us about Greetings from Asbury Park?
Yeah, so first, thank you so much for having me here. It's an interesting story, and it's an interesting place. So a lot of the like Junot Diaz and Tom Perrotta, who are on that list, they're both authors that are writing either from or about Jersey. But the Jersey Shore to me has always been this like really overlooked place that when people think of the Jersey Shore, they think more of reality TV and all of that. Where Asbury Park is like a really kind of unique place. It's this weird convergence of of different races, different religions, different like socioeconomic backgrounds. And it happens in a really natural way. And especially now, I think people are really grasping to find like these settings that combine all these different things in, and it kind of comes off artificially sometimes. And Asbury Park has that just naturally sitting there. So I grew up there. I always wanted to write about the Jersey Shore. Greetings from Asbury Park started out as a group of like vignettes, little short stories, kind of in the tradition of like Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio. And over time, they just kind of came together into this novel, and yeah, there it is.
What can you tell us about the story, without giving too much away, of course?
Yeah, so Greetings from Asbury Park centers on three half siblings as they confront the death of a distant and bullying patriarch. He dies actually before the action starts. He leaves them all with very different inheritances, and they have to navigate the world, and they're kind of tied to one another um, because of their memory of him, because of their just who they are, but also largely because of what he leaves them, and the bind and mess that he leaves them in. Unexpected relationships pop up between them and between the world as they interact with it. But really, it's about the three of them kind of finding their way in the world, figuring out a moral relationship with each other, with the world, and the world is represented in this scenario by the town that they're all living in.
Beyond the setting, what was sort of the inspiration for the story? How did you come about thinking about these three siblings and what they're grappling with?
Um, a lot of the issues that they are dealing with are also really topical. One of them is struggling with drug abuse. Um, the other two are kind of dealing with this like mid 2020 ennui, um, and Yeah, I think again, it started off as several short stories. So pieces came up in like, this music era, and there's a lot of music in the book that's coming from Asbury Park. So there's parts that like tell stories of, certain band members. I think the best way to like think about the novel is in two separate relationships. The one is between Casey, who's the only person who we actually see as the narrator at any given time.
Mhm.
The story is mostly told in third person, but he has a couple of first person areas. And so Casey has his relationships with his two siblings. The first is his older brother, David, who's his half brother. And you see kind of most starkly the differences between the two inheritances there. David is given the bulk of his father's estate, and his father, for all of his shortcomings as a human being, was very wealthy. So David is the inheritor of the bulk of this estate, kind of vast wealth, but he doesn't really know what to do with it. He's very, very lost. He grapples with several things, among them his own sexuality. Whereas Casey is definitely more self assured, definitely more of a chip on his shoulder. Then there's Casey's relationship with Gabrielle, who's his half sister. And one of the interesting things about this is that neither of Casey nor David know that Gabrielle exists until after the father passes away. Casey inherits this house in Asbury Park, which is not an area that we get the sense that their father would have frequented. And they don't really know what to expect at this house. And Casey kind of goes there. It's the only thing that he inherits from his father. And he finds basically this hidden family living there. And him and Gabrielle, they both have, kind of vengeance against their father on their mind. And they have this, surprising relationship, and they're kind of unsure what to make of it themselves. Gabrielle is an aspiring musician. She also wants to get out of Asbury Park. She wants to go to college, and she doesn't see necessarily the means by which to do so without, Casey and David's help and the money that they've inherited from their father. And Casey in Gabrielle sees his position a little bit threatened because he's always, for everything else, he's always been the one, child born out of wedlock, and now he's sharing that status with somebody else, and it's a lot for them to grapple with.
You cover, without giving too much away of the story again, but you do, you deal with some quite taboo subject matter, if you will, in the story. Did you think about that when you were writing? Did you ever wonder, oh, am I taking this too far, or how far can I push this, or how did that manifest?
Yes, for sure. After I finished writing, um, I it's going to be hard to talk about it without just saying that there's like at least the implication of an incestual relationship here,
Mhm.
um, and I think that's fine to say. I think it's
Okay.
fairly upfront about the in the novel. Um, One of the things and one of the questions that I wanted to be asked by that is right now, especially in American fiction, there's a huge amount of like gravity placed on crossing cultural boundaries that we see to be unfair. But there's not that much that's like, okay, well, why is this unfair? Why is this, And I'm not saying that I think cultural, taboo around incest is incorrect. But it's an interesting thing to look at, and it's really difficult in American fiction, at least, to construct a scenario in which there's a transgression that we're actually questioning. And for instance, when you see in American fiction now an interracial couple or a gay couple, no one, it's typically taking the stance like the author and the reader are both agreeing together. This is really unjust. And we're looking at this injustice together, and this is a story of these characters overcoming pure injustice. Whereas, you look at the past kind of classics that deal with interracial relationships, that deal with gay relationships, and a lot of them are writing at a time when it's by no means accepted, and it's a very different question to ask when it's accepted and when it's not. And when it's not accepted, it's asking the question, well, who gets to decide what two consenting adults get to do? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and do they get to decide that themselves, or if the rest of the world has this, idea of morality, do they get to impose that on those people? And I think that very few people in history are imposing more, or that's probably an overstatement, but I don't think it's typical that people are, imposing morals on somebody else because they want to be unfair and they want to be oppressive. I think they are doing it out of a genuine, like, they think this is the right way to do things. And it's worth taking something that still rubs us that way and saying, well, why is this the right way to do things? And if they don't think it's the right way to do things, why do we get to tell them something else? Um, yeah, I'll say that, like, in most relationships in which, a brother and a sister are contemplating something, it would be inappropriate for a vast amount of reasons. One of the most would be that growing up together, they have, this weird relationship of the one that's older, or the one, they can influence one another's psyches in development. This is a really carefully constructed scenario in which they meet as adults. They're both fully formed people. They're not minors. Um, they both know what they're doing. So does somebody else get to say, no, I don't agree with this. This is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was a difficult thing to write because at times you feel like, yeah, you know what, I do feel that that's maybe wrong. But do I get to impose that on other people? I don't know. It's and I don't, presume to answer the question. I just want to ask it.
And you do it very skillfully. And speaking to that skill, and you touched on the point of different points of view that you used earlier, and it's of course not unusual to see a novel that's coming from different points of view these days, but it was, I thought, unusual and done well that Casey is the only point of view that we hear in first person, and then we get some other generally closed thirds. So how did you make that decision? Why did you feel like it was important to hear Casey's voice in first person? And how were you able to weave that together with the close third on the other characters?
Yeah. So um, when I started writing it, at least, I think Casey was the head in which I felt the most comfortable, residing.
Mm.
Um, but there's also, another part of first person, which is it gives you the ability to be kind of an unreliable narrator. The first person perspective is riddled with bias. And that's how I wanted Casey to be portrayed. Whereas I actually wanted to give most of the other people a little bit more authority, so that
Mhm.
you're looking at Casey is doing things. You see first through his eyes, this kind of jaded point of view, and then the close third. Why I love writing in close third, and why, I think for everything that I do from now on, I probably will, keep that, at least as a favorite, is that you get this authority, and there's a certain believability that comes with, like, the things that you're saying. It's a third person, so it is, these things are true, they're happening. um, but you also get to really get inside someone else's mind, and it gives you a little bit of an opportunity to showcase dissonance between the way that somebody's thinking and the way that the world is perceiving them.
Mhm.
um, Whereas Casey is so, closed off in this, like, shell of his own ego, and, this defense mechanism that he throws up, that he's not even really aware of the way that the world perceives him. And he is, a little bit out of touch, I think, with most of the people in the novel. And that is meant to come to a head in the somewhat surprising way that it ends, um, which he certainly didn't see coming.
The title also is the title of Bruce Springsteen's debut album. I'm assuming that that did not happen by chance.
Randomly.
Do you want to talk a little about that?
Yeah. So the first, I guess, on the Jersey Shore, like, every town And the towns tend to be really small. Asbury Park is one of the bigger ones, but most of the towns are like 4 blocks wide, 5 blocks wide, something like that. And most of them have painted like, greetings from Monmouth Beach or greetings from whatever.
Mm.
Um, what's fun about the Asbury Park one is that fun is a loaded word, but what's interesting, I think, about it is that that's certainly the most famous of the greetings froms, and it's also the most now kind of tinged with irony because um, Asbury Park is not the resort town, or in 2000, or between 1970 and 2010s, Asbury Park was not the resort town that it used to be. It wasn't this bright glitzy place with Tilly the Clown's face being representative of what was going on there. It was a place like really 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 fraught with like racial tensions, with socioeconomic tensions, with political problems, extreme poverty, really bad schools. So you have like on the one hand this greetings from Asbury Park, which is like really bright shiny words, and there's a sense of dramatic irony where you're either looking at it from a time at which greetings from Asbury Park was an accurate way to represent this town, or it's just like you understand the dissonance. So it's kind of um, a loaded phrase to describe like a really really complex town in its most euphemistic way, but it's not really appropriate, or it wasn't until the 2010s, and now Asbury Park is now becoming once again this very glitzy resort town, which explodes in the summer, and it's like filled with everybody from everywhere, and recently crowds from New York, and it's once again on the beach blocks. It's like an amazing place to be,
Mm-hmm.
but that's still not necessarily true on the other side of Main Street. And I'm not using Main Street metaphorically, like it is actually Main Street. um, and, and that's kind of the dividing line. And it's still one of the worst public schools in the state. It's still one of the most impoverished areas of the state, and the just like its problems were very confined to the limits of Asbury Park, so is the whole rejuvenation going on now. So it's kind of a town that's always having friction with its neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and that's why greetings from Asbury Park is just such like a fun title, because it is not a bright shiny book by any stretch. And yeah.
This is your first published novel, but
Mhm.
it's not the first novel that you have written. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Um, so can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's kind of important to make distinctions, because so often the debut novel that is published is not the first novel that the author has written. So can you talk a little bit about what you wrote before and how this one came to be the one?
Sure. So I did not. I think I came to writing kind of late for a writer. I studied math in college, and I kind of just had to take like a writing course in my junior year to fulfill like a humanities requirement, and I just it was like a total accident, and it just kind of happened. So I felt like I had to play catch up, and I did a lot of writing, a lot of really bad writing between like ages 22 and 25, and um, I think the first novel that I really finished, um, it got fourth place or something at the Faulkner Society Awards, which was a really nice. Side note, full circle coming with this one, because this one won it in 2020, which was really cool, and that's like kind of the first thing that gave me the confidence to keep going. That um, and that one had I think the protagonist's name was Casey Larkin also. And so there are certain things that are lifted, but there are, certain things that are certainly not. And that one was mostly derivative of like On the Road, I think. and like almost embarrassingly so. Like I'll go back and go, I don't know if that's kosher, but I like it wasn't my discretion that was like, oh no, this shouldn't be published. Like I certainly tried. There was a lot of rejection, and I think that is, I think you ask any published writer, and they'll say that like one of the biggest things is you just like confidence in the face of rejection, and uh, there's a ton of rejection. Even with this book, I think there's taboo topics in it, and it took a while to find a publisher who is willing to go forward with all those. And I'm really grateful that we did. But yeah, this is so I guess this novel has some elements of the first one that I finished, but this is probably the fourth like full book that I completed, and um, it's not like four distinct books. I think each one has like a certain amount of the others, and kind of I took all the best parts of them and put them in this and the next few. But yeah, I guess a lot of it was just like trying not to focus on um, the rejections, and I guess part of being able to psych myself into that was like, you've not been doing this for that long. And each book that you write is kind of like your own crash course writing topic, or your own like crash course in writing. I felt just like getting better all the time, and I, very selectively chose to focus on that.
And with this one, what was, sort of the exact road to publication like for you? What happened with this one from, you finish it up and then now it's on the shelves?
Yeah, so I'm trying to think of the actual timeline, but my agent Michelle Tesler, who's awesome, I met her at the Faulkner Society Festival when this won as the novel in progress,
Mhm.
and so she looked at like the first half of it, and she was like, when you're done, send it to me. I finished it, within a couple months, and I sent it to her, and we decided to go forward, which was great. And I think as like a 25 or 26-year-old, I was like amazing. Like signed up with an agent. Like now it's just going to be like write me a $10 million check for this book. And, fast forward like 18 months, and again, like this book saw a lot of rejection, and a lot of really nice rejection and a lot of things that were really complimentary. But it's at the end of the day, it's still like a no. Um, and I actually credit Michelle with she was like, no, this is great. We're going to find a publisher for this. And I don't know what is typical, but there's times at which it was hard and your confidence feels shaken and you're like, okay. But I guess so that would have been maybe 2018 or 20, sorry, like 2020, very beginning of the year, we started going out to publishers. I finished it. I sent the full manuscript to the Faulkner Society again. In the midst of a couple rejections, I got news that it had won the Faulkner Society Award, which was very cool. And then I think it was probably like January, February of 2021 that we, or sorry, very, very late 2020 that we signed with Blackstone. And then from there, and I think this is typical, it's like 18 months. So the first couple months are actually weirdly idle. And then, it was working with a development editor, which is like, big plot points, major shifts, major additions, major deletions. And then from about 8 months out, it was just like copy editing, artwork, and then probably 6 months before the pub date, I had an actual physical copy, which was like an amazing thing to get a box of, and then it was off to reviews and stuff like that.
How much did it change during that developmental editing process with the publisher? Was it like a was it a lot of big changes, or like, uncomfortably so, or is it just a couple things here and there?
Um, no, and that's, I mean, that's a nice thing about talking to, people before they actually buy the book, is like if somebody wanted to like completely derail your entire plot line. Um, and there were people who initially were like, if you're willing to move this around, like we would look at this. And I think it's a decision that everyone has to make separately. But for me, it was important to keep the story more or less intact. There's entire chapters that were added. There were chapters that were more or less deleted, and there were a lot of things that were shifted around. It's certainly a much stronger book, post editing, and I feel like very very lucky that we didn't have any major disagreements on like this is going to make the book better versus worse.
Mm-hmm.
And like overall, it's just such a thrill, especially for a debut, to have someone else taking your work, professionally seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And like, okay, well, this is, how is this going to look to the world? And it's really like formative experience. It's cool, but not that much changed in a big way. And then I was very lucky to have an editor who also was okay with me. I like kind of rhythm obsessed in writing,
Mm-hmm.
and I really want like the syllables of a sentence to line up a certain way, and sometimes commas or like correct punctuation gets in the way of that. And, and he was totally on board with that. He was like, as long as it's not confusing, I'm good with this and we can go ahead with it. And that meant a lot to me because it's just like a little tick that like the wrong punctuation can really mess up the flow of something. And I'm definitely like flow obsessed with sentence structure.
That's interesting. How did you get flow obsessed? Or obviously I mean, did you just discover one day that was your thing? Everybody's got a thing.
I don't. I think like the first things that I really read really seriously were like I used to love poetry,
Mm-hmm.
way before I got into fiction, and like the whole idea of meter and rhythm are just incredibly important to me. Like all of my favorite books are books that I think are really musical and really, um, people who treat the sentence like something with, it's kind of like a musical score. You have a rhythm, and there's certainly times when you don't need to hold to it, but you should always be kind of aware of it, and at least aware of what a sentence is doing, what it could be. And there's times at which you explicitly want something to not sound musical, and you want it to be kind of like ugly and raw, but that's also a decision. Um, so I don't know. I grew up playing a lot of music and doing a lot of poetry, and I think it always just like stuck in my head.
You're currently an MFA candidate at the New School. Is that still currently an MFA candidate? So obviously you didn't need the MFA in order to get published. But what has that experience been like for you? And what made you decide to move forward with the MFA?
Yeah. So actually, it was kind of funny. I think I got my acceptance letter to the MFA program like it was in the same month that I learned that this was being published.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like a really kind of surreal experience. I kind of knew that I wanted to do it anyway, just because I always felt like I missed out on having workshop. And there's a really big difference between reading your own work and being like, this is great, because you wouldn't write it if you didn't think it was great. But seeing specifically what other people, it's like it's so invaluable to be able to know what your peers think of different parts of your work in like a very targeted way. And as someone who had never had a workshop experience before, it was like really just like such a pleasure for me to have 3 semesters of that. Especially this was 2020 that we started, so my first classes were September 2020, and basically the next 3 semesters is just all like workshop and literature stuff. So I read a lot of stuff that I'd never been exposed to, both, published works and like student stuff, and got like really incredible feedback from a broad array of people. And it was just like an amazing experience. And I know people are fairly split on the MFA question, like, whether it's necessary. And I definitely don't think it's necessary, but it's like, I don't know, for someone who had never had a workshop before in any kind of rigorous way, it was like really just a wonderful experience.
Do you have a particular writing routine? Do you like get up first thing every morning and write, or is it just what's your routine?
Um, I don't know if I'm supposed to admit this. I listen to like a lot of audiobooks, so I almost
I think
never
that's
listen.
fine.
um, I almost never listen to music. I just do a lot of audiobooks, like when I'm running, when I'm walking.
Well, you're hearing the rhythm.
So I'm doing that, and then I mostly write by taking notes. And again, I don't know if I'm supposed to admit this because I feel like I'm supposed to have a moleskin, but I just do it in my like phone note app, and I take like really long notes, like pages and pages a week. Um, and then the first thing I do when I'm gonna like sit down and write is I just basically transcribe those. So I rewrite them, clean up little like errors and things like that. And I had a really nice experience with them in college. My senior year, I was able to take a independent study with Oscar Huelos, who's like a Pulitzer Prize winner for the Mambo Kings Play Songs of Love. And he really impressed upon me that like your subconscious should be doing most of the work when you're writing. And I kind of find that works. Like if I'm thinking about a story, I'm like at a certain point in a book, and then I'm walking around and I'm reading a lot of different things. Everything kind of gets filtered through this lens of like, okay, how do we keep writing this book that you're working on right now? And all my notes will kind of pertain to that, not exactly to the part that I need them to, but somewhere. And then I find like the experience of just organizing notes that you take like kind of cathartic, and it's you're doing something, you're not just staring at a blank piece of paper or screen. For me, it's a screen, and that helps, and it helps to just as soon as I sit down to actually write, like I kind of know what I'm writing already. So I wouldn't say that like the process of creation is done while I'm actually typing, which to me is kind of a relief. A lot of people do it very differently.
What are you reading right now or listening to?
What am I reading right now? So I'm in the middle of the Zuckerman Bound trilogy, which is the Philip Roth. Kind of because the thing that I'm writing, I'm kind of shaping what I'm reading by what I want to be writing, and I'm kind of doing a book now where I'm like alternating between close thirds of different people, and one of the characters I want to be kind of a Zuckerman-ish type figure, and so I'm reading a lot of that. But what I'm listening to right now is Under the Volcano, which I've read like a ton of times, and I think it's for me like by far the best book of all time. And just like the rhythm of it, everything, like his sentence structure, like the way that he constructs the whole novel, it's really like symphonic, and it's just such a masterpiece, and it's such like a pleasure to listen to because it's kind of like its own music.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before publishing this first novel?
Oh, so many things. I guess the first is like that not all critics are good critics, or not all critics like your work, which should be obvious. But there's this like release thing that happens when you put the last edits on something, and then you can't really touch it anymore. And like some things that maybe you wish you could explain in chapter 4, you don't get to explain them. And I agree with that. I think like for a writer, it's important that all the meaning is on the page, that there should not have to be anything explanatory. but there's something super salient about wanting to add something that you can't, and just like how final it is when you say like, okay, it's ready. So that's really interesting. And yeah, I guess the other one is like how much people read into your work and how much people read into your characters and how much people expect that you are in some way reflected in like all, if not most characters. I have like some extraordinarily personal questions at readings, and they'll substitute the character's name for you, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And, I'm like, well, why don't read it and then come back to me.
Okay. I'm gonna wrap it up on my usual last question, which is a fun one. If or when your book is made into a movie or TV series, what would you pick for the theme song?
Oh, that is a really fun one. I don't know. Maybe I guess it kind of like has to be a Bruce Springsteen song. So maybe like Glory Days, because it has the same level of irony, as it's kind of like that Goodbye Columbus dissonance of really happy but also kind of sad.
Yeah,
And yeah,
I like it.
something.
Daniel Turtel, thank you so much for coming on today. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and I've really learned a lot. So thanks for that too.
Thank you so much. This was so fun.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.